Hello, welcome to my channel, another Bibliophile Reads. My name is Greg, and March is going to be over at the end of this week. Well, almost over. There's going to be just one little Sunday before April. So March Mystery Madness has to be complete. The Historathon has to be complete. And then April. And Historathon, I don't think I'm going to get to any more books for the Historathon. I know I had scheduled myself to read The Trial of Socrates by I.F. Stone. I picked it up just a little bit, and it just wasn't going anywhere right away, so put that down. But there are some mysteries scheduled to be finished this week, so I will have my, my finger on the pulse of March Mystery Madness. We shall see. I have finished Skeletons in the Closet by Jean-Patrick Manchette, originally written in French and published in 1976. This translation was issued in 2023. It is a police I have finished Skeletons in the Closet by Jean-Patrick Manchette. It was originally published in French in 1976 and translated into English in 2023. This is a private detective novel. If you don't think the French can do American-style private detective novels, you are wrong. This is the story of Eugene Tarpon. He's sort of a down-on-his-luck private detective. One night he gets a call from the commissioner of police telling him that he is sending him a client. A woman's daughter is missing. He says, go ahead and take the woman's money. Don't bilk her too much, but don't really look for the daughter. It's not important. The detective thinks that's really rather odd, but he takes the woman's case and, he disobeys the police commissioner and starts trying to find this missing daughter. And he also has a second job where he's trying to find a thief at a pharmacist shop. A pharmacist has a couple of clerks, and he says these clerks, one of them is stealing money from him. So he's got to go investigate that stolen money as well as investigate the missing daughter. Well, things are going to get rather messy. That these two jobs are going to somehow coincide together because, well, that's just the way the police detective, not police detective, private detective stories go. And it's pretty good. The detective gets in a lot of trouble, especially when, I won't mention too much, but let's just say his boss, the woman who hired him, dies in front of him. And, he's going to be blamed for that murder. So he's got to solve the murder and solve the missing daughter case and find out who's robbing this pharmacist till. It's a pretty amusing detective story. It's only 168 pages long. It reads really quick, and I don't think you can go wrong. I've read a few other novels by Jean-Patrick Manchette. While this is not my favorite of the ones that I've read, it is definitely a book that if you want to pick up crime stories, detective stories, especially ones set outside the United States, I can recommend it. Sometimes I read some very odd books. I finished Zola by D.E. McCluskey. This is an extreme horror novella. In the afterword, the author says that he originally wanted to write a story about a young boy that was turning into a block of cheese and started eating himself. Now that's just a bizarre little story in and of itself, and perhaps it could have worked. However, the story that the author wrote was a real hot mess of a short story. As I said, the title of the story is Zola, which is the last name of the main family. And the father in that story named his son Gordon. So his name would be Gordon Zola. Yeah, that's kind of weirdness of itself, and that seems to be like a holdover from the original short story idea, and it just had no place in this horror novella. Because in this one, the young boy Gordon is abused by the father. So the mother kills the father and eats him. After that, the mother sort of gets a fondness of eating people and feeding people to her son Gordon. But she garnishes this cannibalistic feeling or urges with lots of cheese. And from there, let's just say it goes to all sorts of extreme, gross out descriptions of what you can do with flesh and cheese. I really don't think this was a successful short story. It just, as I said, it was a hot mess. And really sort of nasty descriptions of the author just trying to gross the reader out. It reminded me of Wrath James White, who entered some of his short stories into a gross out competition at the National Horror Conventions. And those short stories are supposed to be about 5 minutes long. And this story was about 120 pages long, and really, it could have been 10 pages long and gotten everything done that it wanted to do. A really big disappointment. My God, you cats are absolutely ridiculous. This is a shower. Cats do not want to be in a shower. I have finished listening to the audiobook version of The Bat by Jo Nesbo, a crime novel translated from the Norwegian, originally published in 1997. This is the first book in the Harry Hole series. It is very popular as an example of Scandinavian crime fiction. But what surprised me going into this book is that it read more like the fifth or sixth in a series. Harry Hole was just brought into the series as a character, and there was not a whole lot of introduction up front. You just got dropped into the story with him as the main character, as you would be expecting that in like a long-running series. A second thing that kind of surprised me was that this book was not set in Norway. The location was Australia. Harry Hole is a Norwegian detective who's brought in to help with the murder of a Norwegian girl in Sydney, Australia. She was sexually assaulted and strangled. And it appears to be the work of a serial killer. And Harry Hole is out to help the Norwegian police solve this crime. So that right off was just a little off-putting. It was still a good story. I just felt like dropped in the middle of everything. Just the Australianness and the fact that you don't get a whole lot of introduction to Harry Hole, who they call Holy in Australia. And it follows a very typical line of police detective books. Like he's solving the crimes and picking up the clues, and you're trying to pick out what are the red herrings. You're trying to pick out who the killer is, because once you've read about half the book, the killer has already been introduced. You can say, okay, who among all these characters is the real killer? And did I finally guess? No. I got pulled in by one of the red herrings. I'm sorry to say for myself. But ultimately, it was a pretty satisfactory crime book. I did like the character of Harry Hole. He does do the Jo Nesbo does something with Harry Hole in the towards the end of the book, or I say 2/3 of the way in, more to the end, that I was not expecting, and I liked that. I like it when authors do the unexpected. My one real beef with this book has to do with the ending, and it's not a bad ending. He did something, without a spoiler, let's just say that is not true to the real world. There is an animal featured in this book, and from everything I know about this animal, it would not behave that way in real life. There are certain restrictions on this animal and how it behaves in captivity. And that may even be a little too much of a spoiler. Not a huge spoiler enough to ruin the book, but or to even give you a hint of who the real killer is. But I enjoyed this one pretty much. Let me make a little bit of a clarification. This is going to be a very minor spoiler for the bat, but I mentioned an animal in that review, and let me just say that great white sharks do not survive in captivity. And there is a scene at the end of the book that features a great white shark that is held by the Sydney Aquarium. That shark could not exist in real life. It would have died. I have finished a book that I started last February. Last February, I was the co-host for Holmes is Where the Heart Is, where we were reading Sherlock Holmes short stories. And one of the weeks was to read pastiche short stories. And a pastiche is essentially just a Sherlock Holmes story that was written not by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. The book I read was written by Hugh Ashton. The actual title is Tales from the Deed Box of John H. Watson, M.D. And in this collection of short stories, it's supposed that the author uncovered a deed box owned by Watson that contains some unpublished short stories or unpublished memoirs of Sherlock Holmes' adventures. Now, some of these adventures are alluded to in other canon short stories, but were never actually written. And the 3 short stories, and I say they're decent. They're not as good as Conan Doyle short stories. They're sort of very middling, but they're highly entertaining. And it sort of just goes to highlight just how popular Sherlock Holmes is, and how everyone can write a Sherlock Holmes stories now because Sherlock Holmes is in the public domain. And the reason it took me so long to get this book finished is that I was on my book buying ban, where I could not buy any books that I did not already own, although my exception was reading events like the BookTube Prize or this reading event, because we actually interviewed the author on a live stream show, and I felt that I really had to read some of his short stories if I was helping to interview him on a live stream. So that was an exception to my buying ban, but it would not count as a book that I'd read if I had read all the short stories. So I read the first 2 short stories for the interview, and I sort of saved the last short story for this week. I am glad I read this. If you like Sherlock Holmes stories and you want to try some pastiche stories, I can recommend this. This book is less than $5 on Kindle, so it's well worth the price of admittance. I have finished reading City by Clifford D. Simak. This book is presented as a novel, although it is really a collection of short stories published over time. The novel was what's known as a fix-up novel, which just means that the author just collected all the short stories and pretends it's a novel. It was originally published in 1952. It is the story of dogs and robots. The collection of stories is presented as a series of tales that dogs tell each other about their past. And the dogs, in the sort of like introductions to the short stories, are arguing, well, are these creatures called humans actually real, or are they mythological? Because this is sometime way, way, way in the future where humanity has disappeared from Earth. Now, some of the stories in this book tell how humans disappeared and how dogs helped them do that. And for that, it's pretty good. This book actually covers a huge period of time. There is some connectivity between the short stories. There are two short stories, or well, actually three short stories in the beginning, which sort of form a little bit of a trilogy. And I think those were my favorite stories of the bunch. But this is a classic science fiction book. There are at least one or two booktubers who will say that this might be their favorite science fiction book of all time. I don't think I would rank it that high, but I still think this is an excellent example of older golden age science fiction. And you get to like the dogs and the robots. Highly recommended. I've been rather busy listening to the big book of adventure stories this week. Normally I would be listening to just a normal audiobook and interspersing the stories in between. But because April 1st is coming up, and there's a very good chance I'm going to be assigned as a judge for the BookTube prize, I wanted to leave my audiobook slot open so I get started on those selections right away if I am chosen to be a judge. So what stories have I listened to? First, in the beginning of the week, was The Mighty Manslayer by Harold Lamb. This is a short story from a series about a Tartar, somewhere in the 19th century, somewhere around there, who was going after Genghis Khan's tomb, because Genghis Khan was buried with fabulous treasure. And there is, of course, a beautiful young woman who he buys as a slave girl and frees. And the slave girl is so happy to be freed, she kind of volunteers to follow this guy around. The girl in the story is described as 14. Yeah, that doesn't go too well over nowadays, but just let that go. Fairly decent story, not the best of this collection so far. I then listened to a fantasy story, 7 Black Priests by Fritz Leiber. Oh, sorry about that noise. There is a plane somewhere above me. Well, anyway, in 7 Black Priests, it is the story of Fafhrd and the Grey Mousers. They're trekking across a vast wasteland, and they're being attacked by these black priests. And they kill one, and then they discover there's supposed to be 6 more. And then discover a huge diamond that may belong to some other sort of creature. You know, it's typical fantasy. I kind of like it because it's short. You know, it was maybe about an hour long, maybe a little bit longer than that. And short form fantasy is kind of hard to find. And that's rather sad because I think you can do a lot with a fantasy short story or novella. I then listened to The Master Magician by Lauren Brent. This is part of a long-going series of an adventurer. It was written in the 30s, and I think this is the best one of the books in the big book of adventure that I have listened to so far. It is the story of this adventurer who's on a yacht with his rich buddy, and they're talking about their 3 other friends who have disappeared. And they have disappeared because they are being killed by the Master Magician, an evil man who set himself of the kingship of an island, and they disposed him as king. And they thought they were going to kill him, but they didn't manage to kill him. So he is now out to get them back and seek revenge and kill them in all sorts of hideous and nasty ways. And of course, this master magician has an island to himself, which he stole from another rich recluse, and it's known as Skull Island because they have a cliff face that looks like a skull. Have you heard some of this before? Yeah, these stories are a little bit, derivative, but maybe in the 30s they weren't so derivative. Well, anyway, I need to seek out more of this Loring Brent's short stories. He wrote quite a lot with this character, and unfortunately they're only available in paperback. That's really annoying. I'd much prefer a Kindle edition, but I might have to seek out some of these paperbacks because they're a lot of fun. And those were the short stories that I listened to this week from the Big Book of Adventure, edited by Otto Penzler. It's a good book so far. Try to get it out. There's a paperback version, there's an audio version, but I don't think there's a Kindle version, unfortunately. Okay, the reading week is done, and it's going to be April 1st tomorrow. And April 1st means I get to start Les Miserables, which actually isn't the truth because I've started it a bit early because that's a big, long book, and I've got about 6 weeks to read it, about 30 some odd pages per day. I think I'll get through it. Well, anyway, thank you for watching, and keep on reading.